Our next guest was on the ones and twos last night. He has been seen freestyling on Podcast Movement's stage. He's well known for his bright yellow t-shirts. Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Duran. Welcome. Actually, let's switch mics.
Test. I'm going to restart. That's the end of it, actually.
Oh, whoa there. That's the end. We don't start at the end. We start at the beginning.
Okay. All right, how's the energy level? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you guys say? Okay. I know we got two more speakers, myself and Dave Jackson, so it's a lot of pressure to make sure I set the stage for you here. So I'm going to talk about the importance of finding your unique voice. There's been a lot of great talks over the past 2 days about finding a voice and why it's so important. So I tend to talk really fast. I come from New York, so think of it as a podcast on 1.5 speed. So if you can't, I'm not going to slow down, so I just need you to listen faster. So there's a professor by the name of Joseph Ferrari, and he says 20% of people are chronic procrastinators. I think Polly mentioned it as well. And so the question is, are you going to be the 20% who don't take any action? So that means a fifth of this room are going to listen to everything, all this awesome information that came from all the guests here, and you're not going to do anything with it. And so you don't want to be that group. So I'm Harry Duran, and for the past 20 years, I've heard voices in my head. I was on a plane. I was boarding a plane, and it was 2004. And as I was making my way down the aisle to my window seat, which is my favorite seat on a plane, I had come to the realization, figuring out like what was going on with my life, because I was heading back to New York to go live with my parents at the age of 34. And see, like everyone in this room, I've dealt with the crushing lows of the entrepreneurial life, as well as the highs, because we've had all, this is roller coaster ride. And if you're not an entrepreneur, the first thing you need to do is be extremely, extremely comfortable with failure. And it just means you got to figure out what works, what doesn't, get back up, dust yourself off, and just continue. And if you're not comfortable with failing, you're probably not going to succeed as an entrepreneur, because I've tried many, many things. And thankfully, since 2014, I've been the host of Podcast Junkies. And for the past 3 years, I've been the founder of a company called Fullcast, and we produce shows for the likes of now K-Swiss. We're working with Samantha Peshek, who's on the 2008 Olympic team. And it's just been a joy, because it's what I do now, and I'm on the road, and I work from a laptop, and I have a remote team, and I have VAs in the Philippines, but it's been a long road to get there. So when I talk about the importance of finding your voice, this is what I believe. I believe everyone who's in this room, everyone who's still here, everyone who's watching, everyone who was here yesterday, everyone who couldn't make it, you all have a unique voice that needs to be heard by your intended audience. It's really important that you understand that every single one of you has a unique voice. I just don't want you to wait the 20 plus years that I did, because I remember since I was a teenager watching movies like this, and if you know the movie, you recognize it, shout it out. I'm showing my age with some of these references. But since I was a teenager, my father's voice instilled in me the importance of going to college. And this is not an actual photograph of us in the living room. But we would sit down, and he would play these vinyls, and he would play these tapes, and one of them was Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. I think some of you may have read that book, so I'll make reference to that every once in a while. So if it was up to my dad, I would have graduated from a campus like Harvard University, so this is the actual campus. I did make it there. I went to Syracuse for a year, and it was a road trip to Harvard, and that's a story for another time, or maybe tonight after a couple of drinks. So unfortunately for my father, I never graduated from college. I think what happened is the first opportunity I got to get a corporate gig, I took it, because I was like, okay, this is me. I get to wear a suit every day to work, so that means that I've made it, right? It's obvious. I get to go to work. I got a 9-to-5 job, and I left college, and I did that, and I was, pretty convinced that I was like, this is it. I made it. Now that I get to wear a suit to work. And I remember my boss, he was the other voice, and he said, your 6-figure salary now puts you in the top 10% of all income earners. And I was like, well, that must be a good thing, right? If I'm making a 6-figure salary, and I was like, and I've got a 9-to-5 job, then I've definitely made it. But I had a seed sprouting me something this desire to do something different, and it's always been there. And one of the first ways it manifested was during the .com craze. A lot of folks can remember pets.com, right? And it was crazy. If you weren't around then, if you're younger and you don't know what was happening then, it was the gold rush of the internet. And everyone was changing their companies to end in .com. And I had a friend of mine, the next voice, he said, come and join my startup. I was so convinced that this was my shot at .com millions that I cashed out my 401k, sorry, Polly, to zero. And needless to say, I probably wouldn't be here if that had succeeded, and that didn't turn out the way I had planned. So I made my way back to corporate America, and I didn't take any copiers out to pasture, but I did realize, and I was back in cubicle life, and thankfully I had my corporate godfather who kept giving me jobs and opportunities, but I was always looking for another opportunity. So maybe some of you will recognize this skyline, and I had a half brother. He lived in Atlanta. He said, why don't you come down and help me? He owned a construction company. I was doing IT consulting, and he said, yeah, come down and work in construction. I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So I go down. This was just after 9/11. I go down to Atlanta, and hard hat and climbing scaffolds and all that sort of stuff. And the warning sign should have been that I signed a deal in a Hooters restaurant. So needless to say, like all things with family related, that didn't work out. And so there I was on that plane, forced to go live with my parents, tail between my legs, and I was 34 years old. So I want to ask you how often you spend your time listening to other people's voices. Raise your hand while ignoring your own. We all do it, right? We all do it because we think that they know best. And so, as many of you saw last night, I do have a passion for music, and I created a mobile app in 2012 called Know Your DJ, and I was excited, and I started discovering this world of podcasts. Before 2012, 2013, a podcast for me was music, a DJ mix, a 60-minute DJ mix. I didn't know people actually spoke on podcasts. Now, it's all I do is help people with their podcasts. And so I went to NMX in 2014, and I was so excited to start my podcast, and I started taking like blurry selfies with Scott Stratton and Amy Porterfield and Pat Flynn, and then I realized, wow, there's a lot of interesting podcasters here, so let me tell their story. And so that's what I've done since 2014, 178 episodes, Podcast Junkies, and then every time I go, I wear the yellow shirt, and I take pictures, and you can see the t-shirts in the background. Sometimes I didn't get to make them for this conference, but it's really fun. I get to connect, and I really value the relationship I have with my guests, and you get to meet cool people like Mark Maron, and just hanging out, and I mean, that episode with Barack Obama, and I understand he just had Paul McCartney on, so it's really inspiring when you get to meet your heroes. So let's find your voice. So here's the problem. I want you to think about this if you don't get this right. We're going to hide our true selves. You're going to be influenced by others. You're going to have a limited reach, and you're not going to have an audience. But there's a flip side, right? If you get this right, here's the promise. You're going to show our true colors. You're going to become the influencer yourselves. You're going to have an expanded reach, and you're going to vibe with your tribe. So keep that in mind. We have 5 keys to go through. Number 1 is get clarity. So this first piece by Napoleon Hill, he says, auto-suggestion. Twice a day, close your eyes, say out loud what you intend to obtain, when you intend to obtain it, and how you intend to obtain it. You must write this statement down, place it where you will see it in the morning and at night, and commit it to memory. So this is really important. So I know this is a short talk, so typically I do a little exercise. There's someone by the name of Clay Hebert, and he was on The Art of Charm, episode 555, and he talks about this idea of the 6-word intro. So normally I'd have everyone get up, and I know everyone's a little bit tired, so there's what I call rules of the road and how I would walk you through it. So essentially what it is my name is blank, and I help who your target audience achieve the desired result or via my superpower. So just to make this clear for yourselves, my name is Harry Duran, and I help thought leaders amplify their authority and expand their reach through the power of podcasting. It's a one-line intro of what you do. So think about what it is that you do. Now, a lot of people compare this to an elevator pitch, but it's actually much, much shorter. And you don't have to try to describe everything you do in one sentence. What you want people to do is lean in and ask questions. One of my new mission statements is to help 1 million people find their voice. And so that's what I'm thinking of doing, shorten it down, because people are then naturally going to ask me, how are you going to make that possible? So you want this to be a conversation starter. If you're doing a podcast, you want to say, my name is, host of, and who the show is for, if you want to use that as a simple way. But just keep that in mind. What's your 6-word intro? Practice practice that today and practice that for the rest of the time here and when you leave. So that's really important. The other thing that Napoleon Hill said is desire has ways to transmute into its physical equivalent. The subconscious mind acts beneath the surface to accomplish what it is directed to accomplish. So another way to do that is to make sure that you're focused on what you want to do. And what I want you to think about is eliminating the noise. So that's the second point. And when we talk about there's different ways you can do that. One is controlling the flow. So this really means your inbox. We get so much noise coming in. We tend to subscribe to every newsletter that we see or listen to all these podcasts, and we have them on our podcatcher. A lot of this is just noise. And what happens is what they call the inbox is a collection of other people's agendas. And so if you're spending more time in your inbox answering other people's emails, they're happy because you're answering their emails, but you're not getting any work done. So just keep this in mind. And for alerts, I have most alerts on my phone are turned off because it's a Pavlovian response. You hear the ding. Is that the ding that you get a Twitter message, or is that a ding from a voicemail from your spouse, or is that a ding from Facebook? After a while, with all these apps, they want you by default to turn on these notifications. Don't do it. Okay, because it's going to be distracting. So control the flow of information that's coming in because we have a limited amount of time. They say that Barack Obama had like 3 suits and 4 shirts to pick from. I may be getting the numbers wrong, but essentially we have a limited number of brain cells that we use throughout the day. And you don't want to spend them checking other people's emails or checking other people's Twitter feeds or checking other people's Facebook updates. So control the flow of information that's coming to you. And then nail your message. Like be specific about what you want to say. Like that's why I talk about the 6-word intro. Like who do you speak to? Someone said I talk about leadership or I talk about entrepreneurship. That's very general. But the fact that there's a podcast specifically for legal nurses is just fascinating, and that's why it was such a interesting talk, because it was so laser focused on the topic. And like Abraham Lincoln says, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. So refine the message about what you want to say, who is it for, like be really, really clear about who your avatar is. Dave Jackson, something that he said when he was on my show is the fact that he had a photo of his avatar on the wall. So he knew who he was speaking to every time he would have a podcast episode and every time he would have a guest on. And again, run your race. Okay, think about these horses in these races. They have the blinders on, and there's a reason that they do that, because there's so much noise, there's so much distraction, and you're going to leave here with a ton of information. I see a lot of people taking notes, which is really important. But remember, you've got to run your own race at the end of the day. You can't be confused by shiny object syndrome and seeing what everyone else is doing and trying to match them and emulate them. So don't do that. Run your own race. Again, Napoleon Hill, people who have no desire of their own are heavily influenced by the opinions of others and are not likely to succeed. Great accomplishments come from courageous decisions. So again, the shiny object syndrome lore was picked up as a movie by Netflix, and Alex Bloomberg now, the first season of Startup, if you haven't heard that podcast, the first season of Startup with Alex Bloomberg, it tells the story of how he started Gimlet, and it was a TV show by the name of Alex Inc. Unfortunately, the show wasn't that good. So I watched it. It was pretty bad. But it's just exciting to see what's happening in the podcast space. So you never know. Like if you run your own race and you create your own show, you're going to build your own audience. A lot of the speakers have alluded to that fact. So point number 3, follow your map. The process of planning must be continuous and persistent, since failure will often come before success despite your best efforts. So one thing I'm going to talk you through is something I call the holistic podcaster. And it's a model that I follow and I work with clients, so I think it'll be helpful for you to think about your podcast as not just one thing, because some people think I'm just going to produce or I just have to market it, and there's different parts I'm going to take you through. So I'm going to play the host association game. So the first thing is the center, 3 concentric circles, and in the middle is what I call authority. And I'll use examples of guests that have been on Podcast Junkies. So for example, Jonathan Oakes, he's the host of Trivial Warfare. He recently changed over his pricing model. He's going to put 2 of his episodes behind a paywall. His fans responded enthusiastically. He's been doing the show for about 3 years. And so when I think about authority in the space of pub trivia, Jonathan Oakes comes to mind. Now, in order to have authority, the supporting way to do that is to reach, and who better to demonstrate reach than Glenn the Geek, who's episode 115 of the Horse Radio Network. He has, I think at last count, 13 different shows. I may not have that number right, but 13 shows all about horses. There's like equestrian, and this like it's great. I didn't think that there were that many podcasts about horses, but obviously he's been able to do that. So the second part of the leaf is relationships. Now, relationships is, unfortunately, Neil couldn't be with us today, and I established my relationship with Neil a couple of years ago, and then I was happy enough to have him as a guest on the podcast, and as a result, we've built a friendship together. We've seen each other in person. I was able to make a cameo appearance in the Messengers, and now, thankfully, I've been in the Messengers too. So podcasting is really about building relationships. And then the third leaf of that is what I call return. And I think of Ryan Gray, who's the host of the Pre-Med Years, who now has about 2 or 3 different podcasts related to pre-med. His whole business is around helping people in the pre-med space build podcasts. And so he's got an incredible return on how he's gone laser focused on what it is that he does. He obviously has a medical degree, but then he realized that now he can do this full time. He goes to pre-med conferences. He puts up a booth specifically to show that he has all these different podcasts related to pre-med. Now, when we launch our podcast and we think about these three pillars to building a successful show, it's deliver, it's connect, and it's influence. Now, when we talk about delivery, we talk about planning your show. So what better example to use for planning your show than Dave Jackson, who after about 10 years, Hall of Fame podcaster, Dave Jackson, who's clearly demonstrated the importance of planning and taking the time to really, he's used snippets. He's motivated me in the past to use snippets from episodes or sound bites in shows, because he really takes a lot of effort in planning his episodes. So it's really inspiring when he does that. The second pillar, in the deliver pillar, is positioning your show. And positioning, I think about Lou Mongello. So Lou is the host of Walt Disney Radio, and he's just an amazing authority in that space. He took something that was a passion, Walt Disney World, and has now turned it into a very, very lucrative business. He's got relationships with the Walt Disney family, and he's constantly giving talks and doing masterminds, and he's got such a loyal following. So he's really mastered the idea of positioning your show specifically as the expert in that space. Now, when we talk about the second pillar is connect. And for connect, we talk about production, being consistent on a regular basis. And I think about Pat Flynn recently on Podcast Junkies. It was nice to have him on episode 150. And just continuous production, and the fact that he's been able to branch out the production. He now does a mastermind. He does a live podcasting course. He's created a book. He has a podcast player. So he's really gone all in on everything about his show is really specifically aligned into everything that he does about podcasting. So he's built a good business around that. Under Connect, the next piece is publishing. I think about Liz Covart, Ben Franklin's World, published on a consistent basis, and she's so specific in her niche that she's now getting millions of downloads on her podcast, Ben Franklin's World. So I got 5 minutes, so I'm going to speed through this a little bit quicker. Influence, promotion. I think about Hall of Famer Danny Pena, who has also did an amazing job when he spoke. Gamertag Radio, he's been doing that for 10 years. And then lastly, profit. I think about Jen Briney. Jen Briney is the host of Congressional Dish. In case you don't know what Jen does, she actually reads the bills, and for fun, she watches C-SPAN. And so it's amazing, and she unearths the stuff that's in the bills that not a lot of people know about. So remember, deliver, connect, and influence. If you don't deliver, you're not going to have consistency. If you don't connect, you're not going to have an audience. And if you don't influence, you're not going to have any clients. C.S. Lewis said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So what I realized is that I wanted to do everything I can and find my voice as a teacher. And so what I did is I had a 2-day live event, and this was me taking a picture of the workbook. I was so excited, and I was so nervous because I had imposter syndrome. And I said, is anyone going to show up? And I took a selfie before. Fortunately, those desks got filled, and I had people show up at my first live event where I was teaching people how to produce a podcast. But be in places where podcasters are not. This is the Conscious Media Festival. It's in Austin, Texas. And this, again, people did show up. It wasn't just me standing by myself at the booth, but it was just exciting because I made this little flyer. It says, "Are you consciousness expander? Use the power of podcasting to amplify your authority and expand your reach." And I did get a client out of that too. So again, be in spaces where podcasters are not. General knowledge itself is useless in accumulating wealth. You must have specific knowledge and skills in order to add value and be paid for it. So very quickly, find your A-team. And so Napoleon Hill talks about mastermind. So find your Obi-Wan. I had a coach that helped me. His name is Taki Moore, and I still continue to work with him because I realized, as my friend Jason Gaynard says, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. There's an influential speaker by the name of Jim Rohn. He says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so I quickly realized I needed to swim in the deep end. I need to be around a lot of these people who had $1 million businesses that I knew nothing about. And when I heard for the first time that people were making $30,000 a month on online business, it blew my mind, because I was coming from corporate America, but I realized I need to be around people that were motivating me to dig deeper and do more, because I knew that that was possible. So last is focus on your genius. I love using Tesla as an example. Find your frequency. Like when I say about vibe with your tribe, I also want to remind you to create your own stage. People think about me being on a physical stage right now. This is an offline stage, but there's also online stages. So I created a Facebook group called Podcasting for Thought Leaders. I have a group for my podcast called Podcast Junkies. Thanks for the picture last year. That's what's showing up here. And then lastly, a little bonus is amplify others. In case you notice what I've done here, I highlighted all the past guests that have been on my show, because I'm a firm believer in treating my guests like gold. And I think I wouldn't be where I was here if I didn't realize all the relationships and all the friendships that got me to where I am today. And so I really value all the friendships that I've made in this room, and I'm going to continue to add value wherever I can with the friends that I've made here. So in recapping, get clarity, eliminate the noise, follow your map, find your A-team, focus on your genius, and amplify others. Thank you. Yeah. Questions? No questions? Good.
How are you doing, everybody? I didn't recognize you without your turntables. That's awesome. Harry Duran, thank you so much. One more time.